Hello, and welcome to the Path of Maximum Resistance, where today I'm going to talk to you about my fateful decision to leave I guess you could say, successful, certainly stable career in order to chase a dream. I actually attended a web development in-person boot camp, a coding boot camp, and so I'm going to sort of tell you about that experience. I'm going to give you, especially for those people who are prospective boot camp students, I'm going to give you some advice about making a decision to attend. I'm going to tell you whether I think it's a good idea to attend. Going off of that, I'm going to tell you if you do decide to attend, the things to look for, what to ask for um, of the instructors about the curriculum before you decide on which camp to go to, and just generally give you some insight into my experience. That said, I'm not going to review the boot camp that I went to specifically. I'd rather speak in more general terms about the industry and about how boot camps work and how they prepare you for a career as a professional web developer. If you want to know anything about the specific camp that I went to, you can feel free to contact me and I will tell you all you want to know about that. And then there's a myriad of ways of contacting me. The best way is by going to the official website for this little series, which is maxresistanceblog.com. And all my social media is linked there, and you can contact me, and I will tell you all about the camp I went to and how it compares to other camps, because I have a pretty good network of alumni from other camps, and I have a good feeling about how some other camps operate, how the one I attended operates, and I've seen results from both, and I can kind of just point you in a pretty pragmatically smart direction based off of experience. So if you're interested in that, hit me up. I'm also going to talk a little bit about my story, my decision, and also the results of what's been happening since I attended the boot camp. So if you're not interested in any of that peripheral stuff, I totally get that. So I think I'll put like a timestamp in the video description. So the portion of the video where I'm talking just about a review of the actual camp experience, like I said, there'll be a timestamp that'll tell you where in this video you can find that, so you can just like skip ahead right to it if that's what sort of intrigues you. And actually, I just wanted to give you guys a heads up. I actually know what I'm going to talk about for the next episode. The next one, I'm actually going to talk about why I'm doing these video logs, the value I see in it. It's going to be like kind of a introspective sort of meta take on the web series, and just some general sort of philosophical discussion, if you will, some esoteric talk about what we have going on and my motivations and what I hope to get out of it and stuff like that, without getting too wonky and having eyes glaze over. But hopefully it'll be fun. Maybe it'll be a little bit shorter of an episode. But in any case, so today, like I said, we're talking about the web development bootcamp. And first we'll start with where I was at prior to attending the camp. And actually, we'll go even further back than that, because I'll tell you that I've always been interested in web development. When I was a kid, like growing up in North Dakota, which we've discussed before, though like my childhood was spent really outdoors all the time. My friends always had me outside biking. We played basketball a lot. We raced BMX. We did a lot of like really outdoor type activities. I myself tried to keep myself indoors, and a lot of times like I was really fascinated by the internet. My friends weren't so much. My middle school time was like right, not to tell you how old I am, but my middle school time was like right on the edge of the internet becoming super ubiquitous. So it was still pretty new and fascinating for me. And I've always been into like communication. Just like any type of communication has always fascinated me. My biological dad had like a CB radio in his car, and we would talk to truckers, and like that always sort of intrigued me. And then like my stepdad and the family I grew up with, we actually had a radio in our shed for a while when I actually lived in Pennsylvania, and there I would also talk to truckers. So I don't know, there's just always been something about communications that's fascinated me. When I was in the Army, I was like a communications guy amongst other things. Like I've told you, I was a forward observer, but one of my primary responsibilities was taking care of the radios, making sure our communications, like the timing was always synced, which is probably makes no sense to you, but it's a vital thing for communications. I was in charge of like the cryptography, so keeping our communication secure and stuff like that, and I always found that really fulfilling. And when I wanted to go into the Special Forces, the job I actually wanted, I wanted to be a Special Forces communications sergeant. it's always been cool to me. I even like ham radio is fascinating to me. I'm just a geek about communications, so naturally when the internet became prevalent, it like totally hit me right in the feelings, I guess you could say. But no, seriously, it's sort of like the internet was sort of made for my interest, I feel like. So that being said, I've always been interested in it. I started building web pages when I was like probably in middle school, as I was kind of mentioning. Back then, you could actually write your HTML in like a text editor, and you could upload those pages via FTP to GeoCities, and bam, your website was, online. This was before CSS even became a thing. In fact, I actually by around the time I was graduating high school, CSS, cascading style sheets, became like really prevalent. And that's about the time I kind of walked away from web development for a while because, I joined the Army, and then like I had my government career. So for a while there, I was kind of out of the game. But it's always been an interest of mine. Like I've always really been into it. And then to a certain extent, when I was in the federal government working there, in the Federal Aviation Administration, I was able to parlay some of that interest into my duties. Like I took up some SharePoint responsibilities. I did some database analysis. I did a lot of data analysis. I did some database administration is how I should really say it. And learned a little VBA, Visual Basic for applications. I did a lot of like stuff with Excel, macros, Access. And anyway, I found all that stuff cool. And so as my career kind of progressed and I started to decide like, what am I going to do with my life? And I started to get the inkling that I may not want to stay in the federal government forever. And I was starting to think about how I was going to broaden my horizons. I started thinking, hey, I might want to turn this web development interest into my full-time profession. And it just so happens that about the time I started getting that started to be compelled in that direction, it's about the same time that web development boot camps really became the thing. Like they're super popular right now, and I think, as I'll kind of elaborate on later, their real sweet spot was like 2 or 3 years ago. They really became a big deal, and they were really putting a lot of students, a lot of graduates into industry. The dynamic has changed a little bit now, and we'll get to that, but that sort of puts us where we're at. So I was at this point where I wanted to leave my job, I wanted to do something different, and it just so happens that coding boot camps were a totally viable option. So it worked out pretty well. So there was a handful of boot camps available to me. I researched all of them, and mostly because of the way the camp that I eventually attended felt, like the actual vibe I got from it, not so much like the curriculum or anything else. I chose that one specifically just because it felt right on like a personal sense, which may not have been the best decision. And hopefully by watching this video, for those of you who are prospective bootcamp attendees, you'll be able to avoid the mistake I made and make a more educated decision. Because if I knew what I know now prior to attending that camp, I probably would have attended a different one, to be very honest. So anyway, just to give you an overview, to those of you who are not familiar with what coding boot camps are, in this case, it's 12 weeks long. Every day is an 8-hour day. I think ours went from 9 to 5. And basically you go through and you learn what they try to do is they try to turn you into a full stack web developer. And for those of you unfamiliar, basically web development is kind of divided into more or less, and this is really putting it simply, 2 facets, and that's front-end web development and back-end web development. Front-end are the people who make like your user experience, the websites, the interfaces that the user actually sees, where the back-end developers tend to build like databases, connections to databases. They really do like the business logic and kind of the more manipulating of the data, whereas the front-end developers tend to work on how to present the results of that data manipulation to the user. The idea of a coding bootcamp is that you'll graduate with the ability to do the whole thing, thus a full stack web developer, and you'll be able to independently build websites. And one thing I can say in credit of the camp that I attended is that ultimately when you graduated, you were totally capable, and I am totally capable of building a full-fledged website with a database, interacting with data and presenting it to the user. Unfortunately, one of the downfalls of the coding bootcamp experience is that you don't get very in depth with any single aspect of that, so you don't master any of it. You're kind of a jack of all trades but a master of none, which I've come to find out when you're interviewing for jobs is not what they look for. I think they would rather you be really good at one aspect and not sort of dabbling in all. That said, if you want to become like an independent web developer and sort of do like consulting work and own your own web development company, a coding bootcamp is pretty effective at preparing you for that, because like I said, you do learn how to build a website from, the back end all the way through the front end, middle tier, and everything else. It's just, you come to find out that working in industry, though you might know how to build a website, in industry, you don't build websites. That's not what you do, especially at enterprise level. These big projects, you're working on a little piece of a bigger project, and even worse, or not worse, but even more complex, you're normally going into a code base that already exists. So at coding boot camps, or at least at the one I attended, they prepared you to build your own website from the ground up, which is super fun, and it's one of the things that I love to do. But you come to find out that that's a totally different beast than going into a huge system that already is in operation and tweaking on little parts, because it just takes a different level of knowledge. And that's something that only experience can really give you. You can't know enough about how coding works to go to a 12-week boot camp, walk out of it, and it's very unlikely that you'll be able to walk into a very complex code base and just be able to be productive super quickly. It's much more complex than that. So there are things, though, that being said, so I don't want to just in general say that coding boot camps are good or bad. I will say that there's a huge spectrum, and there are some that are very bad. There are some that are just there to take money from naive students who see six-figure paychecks in their future and there's boot camps that just do that. They don't teach you anything. You graduate and you're in a bad situation, and it's really heartbreaking, especially for me. I find it heartbreaking because I attended a coding boot camp slightly older. Most of the kids in my class were younger than me, and when I think of kids at other boot camps, I'm not going to say this about the one I attended, but boot camps that do really work over their students and just take their money, it's really heartbreaking when the kid's like 20, right? Like for me, I don't know, like I should know better. I'm a little bit older. I should have the wisdom to do the research, pick a good school, and get my money's worth from the school I'm going to go to. Whereas if you're a 20-year-old kid and you're full of hopes and dreams and you think that you're going to go work at Blizzard making video games after going to this coding boot camp, and you graduate to find out that that's not the case at all, I can imagine it would really sour someone on the entire industry at a young age, and that would be unfortunate, to say the least. So there are some really bad ones out there, so you have to watch. On the other hand, there's some really good ones. In fact, I am going to give a shout out to one camp, and this is not the one I attended, but I actually know a handful of graduates from a camp called App Academy. And I know they have campuses in San Francisco and New York. Maybe just San Francisco now, but in any case, you could probably look up App Academy. And I have no affiliation with App Academy. I've been so impressed with their graduates that I can speak to them with I could speak about the school with some positivity, and like I said, I'm not getting anything out of it. I'm just trying to give you my honest assessment of what I've seen. So, and you'll see where App Academy is different from less effective schools as I kind of get into it. And I'll start by telling you this: if you're a prospective boot camp attendee, first of all, you're not going to know. Here's what I find really difficult about the entire industry: is that before you attend a coding boot camp, you don't know what you don't know. And I know that sounds crazy cliche, but bear with me, and hopefully I can kind of flesh this out so it all makes sense to you. And hopefully by listening to this, you may know what I didn't before I attended. So some camps are going to teach you how to build a website. Some camps are going to prepare you for a job in industry. Two totally different things, and I beg you to hear me out on that. If you are a prospective student, please listen to me, and I'm going to repeat that. Some camps will teach you how to build a website. Some camps will prepare you for industry, and those are not necessarily the same thing. The camp I went to taught me how to build websites, and in their defense, that's what they promised me that they would do. So they fulfilled the promise that they had to me that they would teach me how to build websites. Unfortunately, when I graduated, I found that I really wanted a job in industry. And I didn't know before I attended this particular camp that it didn't necessarily give you the skills to work in industry. Now, you might ask yourself, so what skills do I need to work in industry? I like where your head's at. First of all, when you interview with these big companies, Facebook, whatever, Microsoft, Amazon, any of those sites, or any of those companies, any of the companies that, or even like your new startups and stuff like that, basically the way that they measure your capability as a coder is that they ask you certain questions that are mostly about like algorithmic complexity, data structures, really like computer science heavy sort of subjects, right? In the case of my bootcamp, we didn't learn any of that stuff. And that's not a problem necessarily. You don't need to know to build just a regular website for the business down the street. It might not matter that you don't know data structures very well. You may never have to, like in JavaScript, you may get away with always putting everything into an array, or you may get away with always using a list, and you might not know that you can use a stack and you can use a queue. And like you may not know underneath of it all how a linked list works. And that may never matter because there's not enough people visiting the site that you're going to. The load times don't really matter. And all of that is sort of minutia that you can ignore. If that's where you're going with your career, then almost any boot camp will work. And in fact, I would go even further and say a lot of online boot camps would be able to equip you well to do that. Now, if you want a job working in Facebook, you're going to find out that every single algorithm, maybe not every single, but every button you click on Facebook is being clicked on by millions of users, right? So every single click has to happen instantaneously. And you come to find out that using, say, an array instead of a different data structure actually makes a huge difference when it's under the load of thousands and millions of users. So Facebook and those type of companies, when they interview you, they're going to be looking for your understanding of those things. Can you look at two algorithms and know, hey, this one will complete quicker than this one, and why? And then there's certain ways of measuring it. It's called like O of N. And it's a scientific notation for sort of comparing algorithmic complexity in both time and space. And companies like Facebook are going to want you to know that very well. There's certain algorithms they're going to want you to have memorized, like how you reverse a list, or how you basically, there's a famous one called FizzBuzz that you should almost have memorized because it's just expected. You may never do anything like it during the course of your work, but during the course of interviews, that's what you're going to encounter. And again, you might find that the boot camp that you go to, and this was the case for me, the boot camp I went to, we never touched that stuff. I shouldn't say we never touched it. We actually alluded to like data structures and like algorithmic complexity, but we never actually had lessons on it. And if we did, I think one day before lunch, we had like an hour-long lesson on like data structures. And they told us that, hey, that stuff is like advanced level stuff. You shouldn't have to know that to do the type of work that you're looking for, which is true. If you are just trying to be an independent web developer, you're not really going to have to bog yourself down in that sort of minutia, and you might find that you are more interested in just like staying up on the latest frameworks. And like, say you're going to be a front-end web developer and you're just always going to know like the latest version of React.js, you're going to be on top of Angular, you're going to know all of that stuff, you're going to be able to do like these cool Kendo UIs and just do real fancy stuff and get real good at Photoshop. If that's like where you're going to be at, you might not need to know this stuff. But I'm telling you, if you're going to sell yourself as a developer, and you're going to look at some of those more rigorous companies, I'm telling you, these are the questions they're going to ask you. So when you decide you are going to attend a coding bootcamp, ask the instructors before you go. Ask them those questions. Say, hey, am I going to learn about data structures? And specifically ask that, am I going to learn about data structures? And am I going to learn about them in depth? And if the answer is no, know that school is not preparing you well for a big sort of Facebook type job. Ask them, are we going to go over algorithms? Are we going to understand like merge sort? Are we going to understand like binary sort? Am I going to know like trees? Am I going to know? That's more of a data structure. But you see what I'm saying? Like, ask about algorithms. Ask about data structures. Those are two very baseline type things that if your school isn't offering, I'm not going to say it's a disqualifier for the school, but just know that that's a school that's going to be preparing you for a different type of job than one that that is a little bit more rigorous. And the reason I mentioned App Academy earlier is because when I graduated from my boot camp, and I started meeting graduates from App Academy, and I would tell them, yeah, we never really learned about like O of N, and we never really learned about data structures and like merge sort and stuff like that. The App Academy graduates were mind blown. They were just like, we weren't even allowed to start school until it was like a prerequisite for us to get in. So a couple of their graduates actually helped me out and prepared me to get me more adequately prepared for interviews. I actually worked with some students from other schools. So that's one of the reasons why I have such respect for App Academy, is because so many of their graduates have gone out of their way to actually help me. Whereas my curriculum at the school I attended, I found to be a little deficient. So that's one thing. Definitely ask about, again, specifically data structures and algorithms. Also, check out where your cadre. So most cadres at these schools, they don't have like most of these boot camps aren't staffed by hundreds of people. It's usually just a handful of instructors, like usually less than 10 probably. So you should be able to talk to them specifically and ask them about their professional history. If your school cadre hasn't worked at the places that you want to go to, you want to work at, a good chance that they can't prepare you to get there. And that's one of the things that I found to be true. At like my boot camp, our graduates get jobs. Sometimes they don't even get jobs as developers. They get jobs more as like business analysts. But we'll still take credit and we'll say, hey, like this person got a job as a developer and it was a really rigorous interview process. But we're not really putting a whole lot of people into like Facebook and Google. And so when we say our graduates are going through a rigorous interview process, well, I don't know if any of our graduates are really prepared to go to what is an actual rigorous interview process like Google or Facebook. And that's because not a lot of our cadre ever worked at those places. So if the interview processes that they've always gone through, they thought they were tough, but they had never done anything else, it's almost like ignorance. And that sounds so bad. It sounds like a really like sharp criticism of camps, but ignorance is what it is. Like if you don't know something, you don't know that you don't know. So if your instructors were all super successful in like startups, super successful in like corporate environments, so say they worked in IT departments for non-IT companies, realize that that's a totally different beast than working for an IT company. So for example, say your instructors were like really, really awesome developers at like an automobile company. You might find that that's a totally like the interview process to become a developer at an automobile company is totally different than the interview process to become a developer at Google. So if your instructors never worked at Google, they only worked at non-IT companies as IT people, they might not know what the interview process is like that you're aiming for. They might think they're setting you up adequately, and they might be actually legitimately putting their full effort into preparing you well, but they just don't know that they're not, because they themselves haven't been through it. So again, all you can do is you can personally ask, and it's your right. It's your money you're going to spend on tuition. So take the time to ask the instructors of the camps that you're considering and say, hey, where have you worked? Like, have you ever worked at Facebook? And you should have some cadre who worked at Facebook. Why are you not working at Facebook anymore? Is it because that you just found like teaching coding is something that you find truly noble and you wanted to give it back to the industry? I mean, ask those questions. They're going to charge you a lot of money to go to these schools, so make sure you are fully satisfied that the cadre has the experience that you want, because that's the perfect situation. So that's very important. So again, you want to ask about the curriculum and you want to ask about the professional history of your cadre. Another step I would take is find people who have graduated from the boot camp that you're considering, find them on LinkedIn and bug them. Be considerate about it, like be respectful, say, hey, I'm considering this boot camp. I see that you went. What's it been like trying to find a job? where are your jobs at, and find and look at people on LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, you can see where people have gone to school. One telltale sign is that if you don't see your boot camp listed on a lot of people's profiles, it's because their boot camp is telling their graduates not to list them. And that happens. I promise you that happens. I'm telling you that happens. Imagine this. Imagine you go to Harvard to become a doctor, right? Would Harvard then tell you when you are applying for your residencies at these different hospitals, don't mention that you went to Harvard? We have a real, like, they won't say it like this, but like, don't mention that you went to Harvard because they have a bad reputation. Well, there's boot camps that say that. They're going to tell you, well, listen, industry looks down on boot camps in general. I've come to find out that's not necessarily true. Industry does not look down on boot camps. Industry looks down on specific boot camps because industry is not stupid. They know, and they know some of these camps are good and some of the camps are bad. So if you're perusing LinkedIn and you're not seeing your boot camp listed on a whole lot of people's profiles, it's probably because people aren't proud of the boot camp that they went to, and moreover, their boot camp is telling them not to list their boot camp in their history. And you should really question why. You really should. It seems obvious. I'm telling you it seems obvious, but when you go and talk to a lot of these boot camps, a lot of them are going to tell you don't list your boot camp experience on your resume. And you're going to hear it so much that you're going to be like, oh, that makes sense. But as you take a step back, it actually sounds pretty crazy. Like, as I think about it now, I'm like, why would I ever believe that? But you'll find that to be the case. So please heed that warning. Man, I'm kind of losing my train of thought here. I'm trying to figure out what else to tell you about boot camps. So you kind of know about asking your instructors about their experience, about the curriculum, about the alumnus. Yeah, okay. On top of that, also, so every camp's going to teach you different languages. Ultimately, I'm telling you, you're going to learn JavaScript. There's no real way around it. Right now, the way that the internet exists, you can't really do web development without, there's like 3 essentials. You need to know HTML, obviously. Then you're going to need to know CSS to do style. And then you're going to need to know JavaScript, whether it's just like jQuery, which is like real baseline JavaScript, or a full framework like Angular or React, which is more of a library than a framework, but you'll get the point, or Vue. And there's some other ones. You're going to learn, you're definitely going to learn JavaScript. It's almost no way around it. Typically, the boot camps are also going to add in like one other like server-side language. Like in our case, we learned C# through the .NET framework. And that's cool. Like, you might learn Python, you might learn Ruby. Those are just, for those of you who have no inkling of this stuff, those are basically languages that allow you to write on the server. Though you come to find out that you can now use JavaScript through Node and also write on the server. So there are schools now that spend all 12 weeks teaching you just JavaScript, which is fine. But the big thing is you're not going to avoid JavaScript. You'll have to learn it. One of the reasons I chose the school I went to is because they did teach C#, .NET. Come to find out that really you don't learn enough about it to really become proficient. So I kind of wish I would have just went to a school that just taught JavaScript and just spent 12 weeks really making you fundamentally good at JavaScript. That said, I will say this: if you're self-learning or you've graduated from your boot camp and you're trying to learn like additional skills, the single most effective thing I found, the best advice I can give you, and I think this is hands down, is focus on one language for a good period of time, and focus, if you can, on an object-oriented language, especially something that isn't necessarily strongly typed, but does make you pay attention to data types, because I'm telling you, just thinking in the object-oriented paradigm is going to make you a better developer. So for me, when I graduated from my boot camp, I ended up studying C# pretty like more in depth. I actually pushed JavaScript aside, and actually the first websites I started making after I graduated from boot camp, I didn't use JavaScript at all, other than a little bit of jQuery whenever I needed it. And like my whole thing was I was doing .NET MVC, because the cool thing is once you start learning like object-oriented programming, it's just, and there's going to be people who hate me putting it this way, it's more complex than JavaScript, which isn't true, but it's just that's an easy way of wrapping your brain around it, is that just bear with me and understand that it is more complex. It just has more rigorous rules that you have to work with, and by having your hands kind of tied by what a language like C# forces you to do, you then appreciate a language like JavaScript a little bit more, or you also learn to hate it a little bit more because it's more sort of liberated. You can just kind of do whatever you want with JavaScript, whereas you find with like C#, Java, I don't know Ruby, so I can't say, but I'm guessing it's the same case as Ruby. You're going to find with those languages that you need to do more. And as you break it down even further, like if you're working with C, that's actually, if you really could, that'd be the best way to go, because then you have to learn how to do like memory management. You have to learn how to allocate memory, things that you never have to worry about with like JavaScript. You don't have to do garbage collection. But I think if you were to go to a little bit lower level language that's a little bit tougher and learn them first, it's going to be beneficial for you when you learn JavaScript. But understanding that you're trying to get a job, that might not be feasible. I will just say, if you can take the time to learn like something like Ruby, or like for me, C#, I really found that taking some courses on object-oriented programming made my understanding of JavaScript go up big time. Like after I did a lot of stuff with, like, I took 3 courses on C#. They're actually on Udemy. I take tons of Udemy courses. But Mosh Hamadani, who is an awesome instructor for C# courses, he's one of the best C# instructors online. I took his beginners, intermediate, and advanced courses. And beyond learning about like C#, I then, when I moved back to JavaScript, a lot of things about JavaScript made much more sense than they did previously. And plus, you'll come to find out as you start working in industry that a lot of companies are starting to use TypeScript now, which is a subset of JavaScript that actually makes you sort of stay cognizant of types and makes you work more in an object-oriented paradigm. So the more you know about object-oriented programming before you attack TypeScript, the better off you'll be. And it's just totally beneficial. So again, if that all went over your head, all I'm basically saying is that if you can, learn what object-oriented programming means, find a language that is object-oriented, and focus on that if you can. For me, I would say learn C#, start making some web APIs. From there, start going on to MVC, doing like your Razor web engines and making your Vue engines, making your front ends that way. And I think you'll just be, when you learn it from that direction, when you come back to the JavaScript, you can start seeing the big picture better. And you're like, oh, JavaScript is just like the client side of this bigger piece of software. So yeah, I'm a huge proponent of that. Just focus on one language, and you're not going to be an expert in one language in any short period of time. But it's sure, and I find that when you interview for jobs, typically companies aren't going to ask you a little bit about a ton of languages. They're going to ask you a lot about one language. They're going to be like, if you're interviewing for .NET jobs, they're going to ask you, like, what are generics? What are interfaces? How do you use interfaces? How do you use abstract classes? What's the difference between an abstract class and an interface? They're going to ask you, like, what is like the philosophy of solid and object-oriented programming, and just different stuff like that. And you wouldn't necessarily be able to answer any of those questions if you just have like a superficial level of understanding of a bunch of different languages. Just so you guys know, my dog is down here visiting me right now. Also, a really important thing to know is that developing websites and developing for mobile are two totally different beasts altogether too. And I can tell you personally that I don't have knowledge of mobile development right now. And to kind of explain that to you is that when you're doing web development, you're building a website. Websites are something that the browser reads and presents to the user, right? And like you can do server-side rendering and all of that. But when you're building for mobile, to me, although a website is software, when you're building for mobile, you're literally building software that will use the native functions of that piece of hardware. So if you don't know this, to build for Android, you need to know Java. And to build for for iPhones, you need to know Swift. Now, there are ways around it. You can build like progressive web apps, or you can use like Xamarin Forms. but they won't harness the actual hardware on your phone. So like say you want to use the camera, you want to use different stuff like that, you have to realize that you're actually doing like embedded coding. So it's a whole like different level of intricacy, and it's much more difficult at least in my opinion, than developing for the web. So know that. So know that it's very likely that if you go to a web development bootcamp, you're probably not going to learn how to build web apps. Or mobile apps, excuse me. You'll learn how to build web apps, like for websites for desktop, and even for like websites that are shown in the browser. But you won't necessarily be able to build an app that'll go into the app store. If there are coding boot camps that are teaching you that in 12 weeks, that's probably all they're teaching you. And if that's where you want to go, make sure you ask about that first. But I'm not really aware of any camps that are doing that. But really, that's another thing about expectations. If you think you're going to come out knowing about how to build for desktops, how to build for mobile, how to do it in 12 weeks, it's not likely. But ask those questions. Like, ask those questions of the school before you go. Before you pay the money, before you sign any contracts, say, hey, like, what are we going to learn about mobile? Are we going to learn Java? And if you're not going to learn Java, then you're probably not going to be able to program for Android. Are we going to learn Swift? And if you're not going to learn Swift, you're probably not going to be able to program for iPhone. So just know that. So I think in general, you basically have a pretty good understanding of what's going on with coding boot camps. I'm just, if you see me kind of looking over here, I actually have some notes. Yeah, no, I think we pretty much covered everything. I just real quickly, I had someone ask me from my previous job if I have any regrets about leaving my position. And I will tell you that for the first, so it's been a while. I actually left my job in June of last year. And up until maybe 3 weeks ago, and this is some brutal honesty here, I had zero regrets. Zip. Not a single regret. One of the reasons why I have no regrets is because I knew I liked to code, and I had a hunch that I would love to code. And I have discovered that I do, in fact, love to code. Like, I really do. And the thing I like or I love about it, here's kind of the problem, is that I don't necessarily love to code. I love to learn. So, like, every day. In fact, last night I was reading about promises in ES6. Might not make any sense to you what I just said, but in JavaScript, basically, if you're doing, there's synchronous programming, then there's asynchronous programming where like everything doesn't work in order. Boom, 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 boom. You might have this happen, and then while this is waiting to execute, this will happen, and then once that's done, this will execute. And so promises in JavaScript are a way of making asynchronous programming work. And though I understand how to do that, like, I like reading about it. Like, I like reading about new techniques of implementing promises and like promises versus callbacks and like libraries that harness it. But when it comes to actually coding it, like, I'd really rather be reading about it. And really, ultimately, I'd like to be teaching it. But I do like building things. That's the other thing too, is I love to build stuff. But you come to find out the actual job of coding isn't necessarily building things. You actually get to a job and you'll be given an assignment of like doing really intricate, like, so let me tell you. So let me go back to this idea of I had no regrets up until a few weeks ago, and now I have a little bit of regret just because I come to find out that if it was a perfect world and I could just build websites, I'd be the happiest person ever. If I could monetize just building simple little websites for people, or even complex websites, but I'm not quite at the level yet of proficiency where like I'm confident enough to handle like deploying, hosting, maintaining, security. It's so much more complex than you think, like authorization, authentication, stuff like that. It's a real burden for one person to like maintain. It's one thing to write the code to get a website established. To maintain it is a whole different beast. And I'm just not sure if I'm ready to do that as one person. So that said, my little bit of regret is coming to find out that industry is a little bit different than what I expected. And I can tell you, so here's where I sometimes get more honest than I probably need to be, but that's what this whole webcast is about, right? Like, whatever. I did get hired. I actually got my first dev job. And the cool thing is I got hired for like a really senior position, which seemed awesome. Like, I'd worked so hard. Like, I thought I knew what I was doing. And in fact, I do know what I'm doing. Got this position. It wasn't with an IT company, but it was with an IT department within a bigger company that's trying to like expand their IT proficiency. The problem with being given the responsibilities of a senior developer when you're not a senior developer is that you're kind of put out on an island, or at least I felt like I was. At the place I worked, the actual team was awesome. The developers who were there, I have the most respect for. They have the skill that I aspire to have. The problem is that if you go into a job and the expectation is that you're like a mid-level or a junior developer, they know they're going to have to bring you up to speed. When you come in and you're hired as a senior, and some of this is again, my biggest enemy is my own head. In my case, I felt like though I would ask questions, I was embarrassed to ask questions that I felt like were low level because I was considered a senior developer. My boss hired me. He knew he was taking a chance on me. He knew my lack of experience, but he took the chance anyway. And it just became, no one ever said anything to me at this job. It was just my own personal lack of comfort in being given an assignment. And just like I would be able to find out, I'll give you this isn't a great example because I was able to figure this one out. But for example, so they might give you the assignment of saying, hey, we need you to start sending our messages to a service bus. The service bus is on Azure Cloud. And basically, once a message goes here, it's actually going to go into what's called a topic. The topic is going to send messages to a client, yada, yada. I knew nothing about that stuff, but I was able to do the research, and that's what being a developer is, right? It's like finding solutions, figuring things out. That's totally fine. My problem was I didn't know how to build it into the existing code base. And so although I learned how to like write the actual messaging program and I was able to figure out how to harness the service bus, and how to use like queues and topics, I couldn't wrap my head around how to incorporate it into the existing code base. And we were a busy place, and like when I would ask those questions, though they were ready to help me, I felt bad that I was wasting senior developers' time asking them questions that I should have been able to answer on my own. Which really, like I said, was in my own head. But the bigger problem is I'm still new enough to coding that I still like brute force a lot of things. Like I will get the code written, but it's not going to look good. And algorithmically, it might not be the cleanest code. And really, I found that like some of the other senior developers, though I would get something to work, they'd have to go behind me and kind of clean it up and make it, more efficient, make the code. Whereas I might just brute force everything through. They might throw things into like a collection and then cycle through it, iterate through it. And I just wouldn't not that I wouldn't take the time to do it. I just wasn't at that next level of thought yet that a senior developer should be. And I just felt like I was doing the company a disservice, honestly. Like I couldn't go into the work every day and just feel like I wasn't up to par for the money I was being paid. So I left. And that's where I have a little bit of regret. Like, I need more time to get as proficient as I need to be, but at the same time, I need a job and I need to get paid. So, like, it's a weird place to be at. And you come to find out that coding boot camps, depending on what level of comfort you're willing to go into a job with, like, I hate being... I understand that you're not going to be the best in every place you go to, but at the same time, I don't like being a drag on other people. And if I am going to be a drag on other people, I want them to know I am like a middle skilled developer. And that's something that you'll find out that unfortunately for those of you who are considering a coding bootcamp is that there are not junior developer jobs right now. And I don't care what anyone says to you, they don't exist. Junior developer jobs do not exist. I don't know if they're just having like their senior developers do junior things, or if the web has just gotten so complex so quickly. But if you find people who are hiring interns, or if they're hiring people and paying them nothing to do menial tasks, tell me. Because I go to Facebook groups, I go to like meetups, and it's the common complaint of all these new developers is that there are just no junior developer jobs. It's just the way it is. It's just that, and part of it is because once you start working, you'll get proficient quick. Once you get over like those initial hurdles, those initial obstacles, you'll find your skills building really quick. So in your own proficiency, you'll jump from junior to like middle to senior very quickly in your skill. So maybe that's kind of why. But when you're first applying for jobs, you're going to find that like it's really hard to find that environment where it's nurturing and they're willing to invest the time into you to build you up. Plus, they know that once they build you up, you're going to go leave for a more lucrative position. So you have to look at it from their perspective also and consider what they're investing in you. But like for me personally, that's what I'm searching for now. Like I'm still out here looking for a job, just like everyone else. I left my last one, and now I'm just like, I'm hoping to find that team that'll see and like, okay, he understands what he's doing, he gets it, he's like interested in it, but at the same time, like, I can't just be thrown on an island and be expected to do some things that senior developers do because I'm not that yet. So there's some honesty for you. And basically that'll be when I tell you I'm gonna make I'm gonna put some time spans into the description of this video. Maybe that'll be a part I cut out, so maybe that's part of it that you guys didn't really need to hear if you just want to hear about what boot camps are like. But I did want to give you a little bit of a perspective of what it's like to graduate from a boot camp, because you might not just immediately graduate and get that $120,000 a year job. It might be more of a challenge than you might think, and it might be helpful for you to hear from someone who can tell you it's not all rosy, because I'm here to tell you that. Like, I in general, do I have regrets? No. I'm really happy I attended a coding boot camp. I wish I would have attended a different one. But in general, I'm happy I went because it led me in the right direction. Knowing what I know now, I wish, ultimately, if I really, really had my druthers, I wish I had the opportunity to go back to school and get a CS degree. Just because, not only because I think would that prepare me better for industry, it also would satisfy my own intellectual curiosity more than a boot camp does. But just not really a feasible option for me right now, financially. But that's what it kind of looks like. So that's where I kind of stand, and that's kind of that. I don't feel like I'm way different. My results of where I'm at right now are a whole lot different than a whole lot of other boot camp graduates. The ones who do get jobs at like Facebook and Google, it's because those students work really hard. And I know people who have graduated from boot camps who do have those jobs, and those are the kids who are up all night doing interview cake, doing leak code, just doing all the things that they can to prepare themselves for the interview. And in my own honesty, I'll tell you, I haven't worked as hard as they have, but also some of it is because like I like to build. Like, I get really, if I'm just sitting here answering like algorithmic questions to prepare for an interview, I get distracted very easily, and I like want to break open the IDE and start coding. So that's just me. I need to buckle down if I want those Facebook type jobs. But yeah, so I really encourage you, if you are a prospective bootcamp student, get in contact with me, and more importantly, get in contact with the prospective instructors and the alumni from the camp that you're considering. And as you can tell, I'd like to talk way too much, so I will talk your ear off and tell you as much or as little as you want to know, but I'm a resource here if you need it. So yeah, definitely check out maxresistanceblog.com. Click on any of the social media links, you can get a hold of me there. Otherwise, it's pretty much going to wrap up this episode. Like I said, the next one will be about a sort of introspective meta look at the whole existence of this web series in general and why I'm doing it and my motivations. And I think that'll be kind of fun for some of you. Maybe not for everyone. It'll be fun for me. So I'm looking forward to doing that one. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you then. Thanks for watching. Bye.